So welcome back everyone. Continue coding and never give up coding. Now, in this tutorial, we're going to talk about React components. Now, components are independent and reusable bits of code. So they serve the same purpose as JavaScript functions, but they work in isolation and return HTML elements. So components, they are of two types. They are class components and function components. So in this tutorial, I will talk about both. I will show you some class components and some function components. But in the next tutorial, we shall talk about only class components in depth, about everything about class components, even their life cycle methods. But in older code bases, you might find class components primarily. So if you look at an older code base of React, you will see that class components have been used a lot. But it is now suggested to use function components along with React hooks. Now, you may not understand what React hooks are, but I'm going to have a full tutorial series about React hooks. Or if you're watching this video, it has either come out or it has not yet come out, but it will come out, which are added in React. Now, these React hooks were added in React 16.8. Now, there's an optional section, where I'm going to talk about React class components. So now, how do we create components? Remember, components are just reusable bits of code. So let's create our first component. The first component we are going to create is a class component. So you can delete all this. Then we can create class. And then the class component is going to be car. And then it inherits or extends React.component. It extends React.component. Now, our class components is one. This is what we call our class components, but also we have function components. Now, our class component has to have a render function. This is render function. Now, this render function should return some HTML code. So the HTML code it should return, let's give h2. Let's close h2. Then let's terminate. And then let it return something saying, hi, I am a car. So this is what it will return. Our car component will return this. Now, if we want to render out our component, when you make a component, it will behave like an HTML element. So you can put it as an HTML element like car-like, and then you terminate. So every time you create a component, you'll create it like that. But all components must start with a capital letter. They should never start with a small letter. All components should start with a capital letter, like car. So this is my car component. So if I save this and then I come back, you can see that on our web page it has brought back, hi, I am a car. Now let's look at some function components. So I can remove this, and then I make my function component. So the function component, it's like creating a function. So I'll create a function, and then I'll call the function car. And then the function should return some HTML code. As simple as that. The function should return some HTML code. Now the code that I want the function to return is also, hi, I am a car. So I can paste this inside. So it's going to return, hi, I am a car. So when I save this, still, even though it's a function or a class component, to call that component, you open your angle brackets and then you put in car. That is to call that component. When I come back to my browser, I can see, hi, I am a car has been put onto the web page. So now we're going to talk about, we've already talked about how to render a component. Now we're going to talk about props. Props are properties. They mean properties. Now let me type out how they look. Props. When someone says props, this is what they mean. Props. They are properties. So these props stand for properties. Properties are like function arguments, and you send them into the component as attributes. So they are like an argument, but you pass it into the component, and then the function or the class will be able to work on the component. Now to pass a property, you come here to, like, let's say your car component which you have created. Now I can pass in a property called color, and then the color would be maybe red. That's the color I have passed in. Now this color or this attribute will be passed into the function as a property into the props variable. Now if I have many properties, they will be put into a into an object. If you use of JavaScript, you'd be calling it objects, but if you're from Python, you could be calling it a dictionary. But it would be put into like an object. Now you can access that object. So now to access this color, red, what I can do, I can come here, I am a, then here I can put maybe I am a red car. So I can say props dot color. Now the keys in this object props is the name that you passed into this component. Those are the keys. So when I save this and I come back here, like I should see that it is now printing out, or the web page is now rendering, I am a red car. So that is how you work on properties. Now what of components being inside components? How can a component be inside a component? So let's have my first component here. Let's let it be a car. It says I am a car. And remove this. It's showing me I am a car. Then let's have our second component. Let's call it function. And then garage. So what it should return for me something. I can open my brackets, close the terminate, delete, come in. Then I can tab, create my wrapper. My wrapper here. Because remember JSX has to be wrapped. If you watch the previous video. So I'll create my wrapper. Then I would have my H1. Then I can have my H1. Then here I would say who lives in my garage. Who lives in my garage? Then I would do a question mark. Who lives in my garage? Now to render out this car component into the garage component, all I do is call it as if I'm calling an HTML element. Car. As simple as that. That's how you render a component into a component. Now if you have noticed the pattern here, the pattern that you are noticing is that when you create a component, you can call it in your code as just an HTML element, anywhere where you would call HTML elements. That's how components are. So I call it car. Now if I come back here to my browser, and you can see nothing has been printed, it's because here it is rendering still the car. It's rendering the car component. But let me make it render the garage component. So when I save here and then I come back here, you can see that it has rendered for me who lives in a garage. Then it rendered for me the car component. But remember, we only rendered the garage component. So the garage component was able to render the H1 element and then the car component. So that is how you render components in components. But remember, you can create a component in another file and import it into the file where you want it. So let's come here to source, create a new folder. I'm going to call it components. Components. Then in the new folder, create a new file and save it as car.js. But as you are saving it, the car should be in capital letters. So every time you're creating a component, you're creating a file, a JavaScript file where you're going to make an individual component and import it into another JavaScript file where you're going to use it. Make sure that the name is capital. It starts with a capital letter, so you can save my car component. So after saving my car component, this file, I can create my component here, my car component here. I can say function car, and then I can return a H1 tag. The H1 tag that says hi, I'm a car. I am a car. Then I will export it. So if you know ES6, this should be making sense. If you don't know ES6, you can look up my tutorials on ES6. I have a series on ES6 and go through it, and then this could make sense. So I would export it. Export default, then I would export car. So after exporting this, I can come into my index.js. Then I can delete all this. Then here on the first line, I can import car from, then I'm going to put the URL. The dot means the current directory, / components. Let's see, that's how I named it, components / car.js. Then I would save. Then I can come here, the component I will render will be now the car. I can now use the car component which I defined in the car file. So this is how you use components that are in files. So let's see if everything is working. You can see it has printed out here I'm a car. You may think it's not printing it out. Let's say here I'm a car 2. So we come back here, you can see it has printed out here I'm a car 2. So that is how you define a component in a different file and then import it in the current. You import it in the current file that you are working with. So these are React components. We have looked at briefly what a class component is, but in the next tutorial coming up, I am going to talk in depth about class components if you would like to use class components. So then in the following tutorials, I'll talk mainly about function components because they are the recommended ones to use. So thank you for watching. Keep on coding and never give up. Never give up.